Hi everyone, I'm Synthia Rovida, and today I am bringing you more coverage on the Dylan Rounds missing persons case. We're going to be listening to audio of a 2011 James Brenner court hearing for prior gun charges. In it, he says a couple of words in response to the judge, but more importantly, we're going to be listening to a large portion where the defense attorney and the prosecuting attorney describe James Brenner's prior history. After we listen to the audio, I am going to show you guys court documents that give more details and some of the things that the prosecuting attorney in 2011 highlighted. Let's get into the video.
This is case number 811MJ243, United States of America versus James Brenner. Counsel for the government, please identify.
John Higgins for the United States.
I have a financial affidavit from Mr. Brenner. He qualifies for the appointment of counsel. Appoint the federal public defender for the District of Nebraska, Mr. McWilliams.
Yes, Your Honor. Richard McWilliams, Assistant Federal Public Defender, on behalf of Mr. Brenner.
I'll note that Mr. Brenner is present. Mr. Brenner, we are here because another district, the District of North Dakota, United States District Court, in that district, an indictment was returned that names you. An arrest warrant also issued as a result of that indictment. And then the issue I have today is the issue of return to North Dakota, and generally it's referred to as a Rule 5 hearing. Have you received a copy, Mr. Brenner, of the indictment?
This part is the audio where James Brenner responds to the judge and says, "Yes, Your Honor," when the judge asked him whether or not he received copies of the documents.
Your Honor, I have.
Mr. Higgins, what is the government's position regarding the issue of detention?
Recommend detention, Your Honor, based on both prongs. Both the safety of the community and Mr. Brenner's presence at an initial appearance in the District of North Dakota, based upon the prongs of the Bail Reform Act. With regard to danger to the community, Mr. Brenner is 48 years old. The court has received a copy of the pretrial services report. It can gather from that report that his record in the last 12 years is insignificant. There's virtually nothing there. The felonies which form the predicate for the felon in possession charge occurred in 1986 and 1990 respectively. And if the court were to examine those, the court could see that the 1986 charge starts off with a very ominous sounding assault with intent to commit murder. That quickly gets malprossed. What Mr. Brenner ultimately is convicted of is a malicious injury, for which he receives 5 years before they were suspended, which does nothing by way of a defense to the charge, but should give the court some insight to the gravity. The court can also see that one of the charges was use of an antique firearm in the commission of a crime, giving the court also some idea as to what was going on there. If the court also looks at the next felony, which is a felon in possession from 1990, the court can see that all of the prison time in that case was suspended. He received 2 years, a suspended sentence from there. So it's fair to say that the felonies which underlie Mr. Brenner's conviction are of questionable seriousness, and that there is nothing on his record with the exception of a DUI in 2002. He gets one arrest in August of this year, but that appears to be have been dismissed for whatever reason, the Dunn County State's Attorney's Office. The court could see clearly also from the indictment that the firearms that Mr. Brenner is accused of possessing are not your standard fare assault rifle or automatic weapon. I mean, they are, from the looks of the list, largely hunting weapons. I mean, there's a couple of rifles, there's some shotguns. These are not your typical game guns or whatever. They're like hunting weapons, like one might find in rural North Dakota, which is where Mr. Brenner's from. In terms of flight risk, obviously anytime the court has a Rule 5 hearing, there's a question, why is Mr. Brenner in our district as opposed to the district in which he's being prosecuted? I offer the following by way of a brief timeline. A search warrant is executed in June where these guns are found. Mr. Brenner engages then in a phone call exchange with an agent Birkenhagen of the ATF. He's in constant contact with them. They interview him. He is in communication with law enforcement. A subsequent search of his camper, from what I understand, reveals a job application to Wessel's Harvesting, which is where Mr. Brenner was working at the time he was arrested. And Wessel's Harvesting was working in Alma, Nebraska, which is where they found Mr. Brenner. Interestingly, as the court could see from the arrest warrant, which is document number 1, and the indictment, which is number 2, the arrest warrant and the indictment issue on October 27th. As the court could see from the emails that I've tendered to it, Mr. Brenner contacted the Dunn County Sheriff, Don Rockboy, on the day before that, touching base, seeing what the status of his case was. According to Mr. Brenner, Mr. Rockboy said, "I don't have anything to do with your case. You need to call the state's attorney." So the day after the arrest warrant issues, on October 28th, Mr. Brenner contacts Ross Sundin, who is the state's attorney in North Dakota. And an email that I tendered to the court to me from Mr. Sundin confirms that he did in fact call Mr. Sundin the day after the arrest warrant was issued. All this time, Mr. Brenner is working a grain cart 14 hours a day in Alma. He is as the court could see from the fact that a job application was found. This was a planned in advance employment opportunity. It wasn't like he just split. This was an opportunity for him to get some work. His whereabouts, from what it sounds like, were never unknown. He's making contact with the sheriff, making contact with the prosecutors up there, and letting his whereabouts be generally known. Mr. Brenner informs me that he owns a truck which is located in Alma, that he will have no difficulty making it back to North Dakota. The court could see from the pretrial services report that he owns real property in North Dakota in the form of a 6-acre plot and a 2-acre plot, one of which his camper sits upon. He knows people in North Dakota. He has lived in North Dakota now for 11 years. He has no family anywhere else to speak of, but he has some friends in North Dakota. I think the court can gather from his record that there is no indication that he has any intent to flee anywhere else. Based upon the fact that the entire time between June and his arrest, he's checking in with law enforcement at all levels of government. I think that evidence is an intent by Mr. Brenner to get this issue resolved, and I don't think there's a significant danger to the community. For these reasons, I think that there is sufficient evidence that Mr. Brenner is not a flight risk, and sufficient evidence that the court can reasonably guarantee the safety of the community. And I don't believe that the government has met its burden to the contrary. Mr. Higgins?
Several items, Judge, some of which is proper. I've reviewed emails that Mr. McWilliams provided. I assume that I'm certain they're the same copies the court has. There's no indication that Mr. Brenner was letting anybody know his whereabouts, first off. Second is that he's got a lengthy history of criminal behavior that includes guns and violence. He's a dangerous individual. He's got an active warrant out of Maryland. Apparently they don't extradite except from adjoining jurisdictions. So he's got a history of failure to comply with court orders. In addition to that, Judge, the indictment here includes 15 firearms of a variety of types, including 5 handguns. Those are alleged to have been possessed by the defendant at 2 different time frames. One is in or before June, and the other is in or about September of 2011, additional firearms. In addition to that, I would proffer to the court that it's my information from the prosecutors in North Dakota that before the defendant left for Nebraska, he gave a shotgun and a handgun to a third party to hold for him until he got back. Reportedly about 2 weeks ago, the defendant went back to North Dakota and did take those 2 firearms. They have not been recovered. There was a search warrant of a camper that was associated with the defendant. The defendant reportedly had said he had 5 guns hidden there. Law enforcement recovered 4, so they're still looking for 1. This June 2011 assault you see reflected here is dismissed. I don't know the circumstances of the dismissal. I've got a report concerning that. The complaining party reported the defendant had struck him with, it's called a tire checking club, which apparently is a wooden item with a metal ring around it. In any event, after the date of that arrest for the defendant for that alleged assault, I have an ATF report of a third party who reported that the defendant was making threats with concerning the arresting deputy, threats to the effect of, I'm going to shoot that guy and I'm going to blow his head off. The defendant is a flight risk. He is a danger, and so we're recommending detention so that he can be brought before the authorities in North Dakota.
In 1986, when James Brenner was 23 years old, he was charged with attempted murder in Maryland. That was reduced to a malicious shooting. In 1990, when James Brenner was 27 years old, he was charged with illegal firearms possession in Maine. In June of 2011, when James Brenner was 47 years old, he was charged with an assault that was later dropped. That assault is what the prosecuting attorney, Mr. Higgins, referred to when James Brenner hit someone in the head with a tire club. In June of 2011, James Brenner was charged with illegal firearms possession in North Dakota. In June 2011, defendant reported that the 11 firearms listed in count 1 of the indictment had been stolen from his residence in Dodge, North Dakota. Upon further investigation, law enforcement determined that the defendant was prohibited from possessing firearms due to convictions listed in the indictment. On October 26, 2011, law enforcement executed a search warrant at defendant's residence and recovered an additional 3 firearms that are listed in count 2 of the indictment. Defendant was initially arrested on this federal warrant in Nebraska on November 4th of 2011. After defendant returned to North Dakota and was detained on this matter, he contacted 2 friends who lived near him in Dodge, North Dakota. In January 2012, defendant asked them to retrieve items from his camper. Those items turned out to be a Beretta model 92 FS, a 9mm pistol and ammunition. The friend turned the pistol and ammunition over to law enforcement and reported that Brenner said, "I want that. I'm not giving that up." The other friend had also retrieved a safe at Brenner's direction. They also turned the safe over to law enforcement, which contained 2 additional firearms, a Davis Industry Model DN22, a 22 Magnum Derringer, and a new Model 6 22 caliber revolver and additional ammunition. The jail recordings of defendant's jail telephone conversations corroborate the friend's statements regarding the newly discovered firearms. On a January 25th, 2012 recording, defendant is talking to friend about getting the safe from Stanley. He tells her to put contents in a new safe. He indicates there are a couple of other things in there, which he does not want to mention by name. Brenner says he will write her a letter or draw her a picture. On February 24th, 2012 recording, defendant says, "There is something in that camper that I want you to get out. Something that I've acquired that I want when I get out." On March 26th, 2012 recording, defendant says, "Did you get that thing out of the camper? Put it somewhere. You never seen it." In September of 2011, he was again charged with illegal firearms possession in North Dakota. I'm going to show you parts of the court document from the February 2021 felony aggravated assault in Utah. Part of this court document is just law and code related to such an assault and why it's a felony, what parameters have to be met in order to be considered aggravated assault. Right here, it gives a description of what happened. Factual basis, probable cause statement. Defendant attacked the elderly victim and beat him up. The defendant punched him in the face and knocked him down. The defendant then kicked the victim multiple times in the face, head, and ribs. The defendant then started beating the victim with a metal folding chair. In July of 2022, 58-year-old James Brenner was charged with illegal firearms possession in Utah. In those documents, he was also named an official person of interest in the disappearance of Dylan Rounds. Obviously, the audio and court documents that I've shown you today does not prove that James Brenner made Dylan Rounds disappear. However, in my opinion, considering his prior violent history, it does show that James Brenner is the kind of person that would have the ability to make Dylan Rounds disappear. Thank you for watching my video. If you like this, give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I will be making more videos shortly, and I look forward to seeing you guys there.